Happy Mushoku Mondays, everybody. Welcome back to yet another Trek the Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series. We are on volume 16, chapter 7. And my gosh, this is a long chapter. It's a super, super long chapter. And my expectation was the fact that since it was a labyrinth, it was probably going to be a lot of combat. It is towards the later part, but for the most part, it's just a lot of kind of chilling and looking at this Demon King and all this other stuff that kind of threw in there. I will say, chapter 7... It's chapter 7 Library Labyrinth, but I'm gonna call it chapter 7 Sylphie the Fuddy Duddy. It's like all these great little moments that could have been, but unfortunately she was there to stop Rudius from doing it. Like when they first enter, and you have Ariel's there with her mouth open, and it's like he wanted to stick his finger in her mouth. Oh no, Sylphie will get mad. I can't do that. He's keeping himself in check. For all the faults of Rudius in literally chasing skirts constantly, even though he's supposed to be faithful, at least he keeps himself in check when it comes to Ariel, or at least when Sylphie's around. Maybe it's just because Sylphie's around, he doesn't do things, even though she's open to the stuff. Not Ariel. Ariel's a no-no. It's like Nanahoshi, a no-no-nya. Anyways, yes, here's my jump into chapter 7. I'm pretty sure this is probably going to be an entire Mushoku Monday in itself, but we'll see how it plays out if we can get into chapter 8. I haven't read it yet, so if we do get there, and I have enough time, I'll stop, read it, and then get into it. But there was sort of something that happens in Chapter 8 that if this is its own Mushoku Monday, I don't want to get into it because I kind of want to do some guessing here. That's one of the reasons why I like to record very quickly after each chapters, is because I like to get that speculation in there. But with that said, let's dive into it. But first, as usual, thank you everybody that dropped by for the premiere. Hey chat, hope you guys are doing well. Happy Mushoku Mondays to you. Hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday. As per usual, greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel monetarily, telling other people about it, sharing it out, telling your friends, all that stuff. It all means so much to me. Hit the like button if you have not already, unless you're just a baka. But let's jump into it. Chapter 7, Library Labyrinth. Stepping out of the teleportation circle was like waking from a dream. No matter how many times he did it, Rudius never got used to it. It reminded him too much of his encounters with the man god. Everyone else had dumbfounded looks on their faces. Edis gaped as she looked around. Ariel craned her neck upwards, mouth half open and eyes unfocused, staring off in the distance. He wondered if she'd get pissed if he stuck his finger in her mouth. Nah, even if she didn't, Sylphie would have a fit. Again, there's that little fuddy-duddy moment. Ghislaine was the only one unsurprised. Come to think of it, she was the first beast folk to use teleportation circles. That is a dumb assumption. I'm not sure why he said that. I mean, the assumption is that, yes, beast folk were around back when they used to use teleportation circles before. They could have easily been involved with a group that had teleportation circles. I don't know if they themselves could have had that technology, but I would assume that they probably work with somebody that could have used them. At least the modern days, yes, you can maybe make an assumption that she's the first. Ariel then snapped out of it. We've arrived at our destination, haven't we? Yes. They were in a room with stone floors and walls, similar to the Dragon Tribe ruins he visited before. I'm curious why this is one of those moments where it's like, are we missing a chapter here? Since when have you visited a Dragon Tribe ruins? Yes, you can assume that maybe he drew the conclusion that the ruins underneath the floating fortress, maybe they were Dragon Tribe ruins, or maybe he's just, I don't know what he means here. This is one of those moments where I'm like, apparently I'm missing something. There was some point in the story that it established that he's been to a Dragon Tribe ruins. When I hear Dragon Tribe ruins, I think of Dragon Folk, like Pedagoose and Orsted. Okay, so what would that attach to that? Maybe he's talking strictly about the floating fortress, and maybe he has made a connection in his mind that that floating fortress is a Dragon Tribe ruins. And thus, things like underneath it, the basement everywhere, is Dragon Tribe ruins. It's just a weird assumption for him to make, because he's never really had that established. Or, like he says here in a minute, just strictly places where the circles go to, he's connecting that as being Dragon Tribe ruins, because Orsted has built those, Pedagoose has built those. Anyways, the other circles he'd used led to places like this. Only difference was this place had a proper door and rooms filled with the smell of ink, parchment, and mold. I was told there's no real danger in here, but this place is a labyrinth after all. Let's stay on our guard. Sylphie and Luke got tense. Ghislaine remained unreadable as ever, and Edis looked pumped. I'll take the lead. Hold up. Gah! Reese grabbed Edis as she glowered at him. What's your problem? Edis, there may be traps. Let someone else take the lead. If a fight breaks out, you can take the vanguard, but for now, stay back. Fine. I love that picture. Good, goofy little Edison moment right there. It was so funny because when I first read this, it's like it gets into like who should we let lead, and there's like part of a strategy that he's playing out here. Like, okay, who's best? Obviously, Ghislaine's the first to come to mind because she's actually been in labyrinths. But then, like he says, yeah, technically everybody says that it's a catastrophe. Like, you let that girl lead, it's going to be problems. Now, they did mention the idea that when it came for them deciding different choices, she was best. So that was like them like talking about how it would be great if Ghislaine was here, because usually whenever we let her choose those things, it works. But at the same time, they're also talking about the fact that I guess in general, she's going to set off all the traps. So it's like that kind of contradicts each other. But no, there is like a side of it that's like, are you choosing not to send out Sylphie or Edis because you're being selfish? But then it kind of turns into, yeah, technically, logically thinking, you have the Eye of Foresight, so at least that's some benefit. Whereas Ghislaine is setting off all the traps and everybody else has no experience. Edis pursed her lips reluctantly, retreating behind him. Problem was, who should take the lead? Only Ghislaine and himself had labyrinth experience. Geese and the others told him everything he needed to know about the dire consequences of letting Ghislaine lead. But as a beast folk, she may be able to sniff out danger and avoid it. However, she had the talent for tripping everyone and heading into swarms of monsters, which she's gonna have to keep her on the leash for this entire time. Her and Edis. Since I have the Eye of Foresight, I'll take the lead. Edis will follow right behind me. Ghislaine and Luke will protect Ariel from either side, and Sylphie will watch our backs. It seems like the best way to go. What do y'all think? I have no objections. We will leave you to take the lead, Lord Rudius. Rudius would be scouting, but Ors had told him the labyrinth had almost no traps. As long as they avoided breaking one key rule, they'd be fine. While we're here, I would ask you to refrain from using fire magic. Why? Edis demanded. Sylphie spoke up immediately. Because if you use fire magic in a labyrinth, you'll deplete all the oxygen. Edis's face scrunched in puzzlement, as if she didn't understand the last word. Oxygen? What the hell is this oxygen thing? Sylphie clearly had more knowledge in this field, but she was actually off the mark. There's that too, but it's actually because the monsters will get angry and attack anyone who damages, burns, or steals any of the books. I don't expect that we'll have to do battle at all, but if we do, please be careful not to damage any of the tomes. Those are some strange monsters, Edis mumbled. Well, to be more specific, they're actually familiars of the Demon King, who lives deep inside this labyrinth. Anyone would be angry if someone damaged their things. Yeah, that kind of snowballs later. It's like one of those things of like one problem, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse as it goes along. They're just destroying everything, trying to survive. Makes sense, Edis nodded. Okay, I understand. She thankfully seemed mean what she meant. She's gotten smarter, Rudius. Give her some credit. I'm not just talking about you, Edis. I want you to be careful too, Ghislaine. Luke. Got it, Ghislaine grunted. Luke anxiously frowned. What if I have no other choice? I have no idea how much this Demon King will tolerate. This is my first time here too. All right. Luke reached a hand towards the hilt of his sword, brows still drawn. He wasn't a very skilled swordsman. By average standards, he was all right enough, but he had nowhere near the level of perfect control Edis and Ghislaine commanded. He probably knew that it was high likelihood that he would hit a book if he started swinging his sword. He's just gonna start hitting things because he can't... I guess it just depends on how narrow the place is, and they don't really give a full sense of, like, the width of the place. Like, it gives a broader sense, but not really, like, how wide the place is. If what I've been told is anything to go by, I don't really expect that we'll do battle. I trust you on that, but on the off chance that we have to fight, maybe it would be best if I stay back. He's like, if we fight Myne, maybe I shouldn't get involved. Probably destroy things. In any case, we'll leave the guarding of Princess Ariel to you. Luke nodded, at least confident that he could do that much. Anyways, let's get moving. Stepping out the door, Rudius gasped at the endless hallway before him. This was a shocker. It was like, he said that he checked it, and I guess he's just going based on purely the fact that he can smell the ink and stuff like that. He literally only went in the teleportation room. Like, he didn't even go anywhere past the door. Like, yes, technically he did kind of note that, the idea of like, yes, I made sure to check it out, but I didn't go very far because of the labyrinth. But at the same time, it's like, you didn't look at all, did you? The walls were 3 meters tall, comprised of stone bookcases far in the distance. Books were packed tight on the shelves. Stepping up to the bookcase, the volumes were more like manuscripts, lacking a hardcover binding. A majority of them resembled a disorganized cluster of scrap paper and memos. He spotted one with a hardcover. It was titled Ledger, written in Demon God tongue. His guess was that it was an accounting record for some shop in the Demon Continent. This is one of those things that really didn't kind of stand out to me until I read this a second time, which I really do like. He's noting that he's looking up at all these shelves, and it's just nothing but stacks of paper, and they're just kind of bound by like a string or something like that. It's just a stack of paper. There's no hardcover binding to go around it that you would normally get from like a tome or a novel or something like that. And yes, as we find out later on with the Demon King, they're just sitting there writing on pieces of paper and presumably just kind of slapping them together and stick them on a shelf. There's no point in binding them because yeah, as we see with Rudius, when he's actually writing in his diary, it's some cases it's going to be an ongoing process because they're not just copying novels that are finished and printed. He's copying anything that's being wrote at the time that's being wrote. So it could actually need more paper to be bound to it. But it's odd that they specifically point out, wait, there is some things here that are not that case. This is a hard-covered ledger that's sitting in here. The assumption is that the demon god, maybe before they even came in there, or maybe somebody visited, brought a book, which I don't know if that would be something they'd be interested in, but like that'd be a cool idea to come in there and say, hey, here's a book. But they're like, oh, wait, I already wrote it down, so it doesn't matter. But why specifically one book, and it's a ledger from that's presumably that is Demon God tongue? It's an odd thing to have this random moment, unless it kind of implies this idea that this Demon King maybe possibly used to run a shop on the Demon Continent before they actually made this labyrinth and started writing stuff. The opposite wall had the same. He wondered what good a bunch of scraps of paper would do anyone. It at least fit the image of a library labyrinth, even if its contents were like a maze. This would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Would they ever find this material on King Ganas? After Edis inquired on what was the matter, he said to press on. After a while, instead of it seeming like a straight hallway, it slightly curved. There was a brief gap in the shelves where the hall branched off in the shape of an H. Before continuing down the hall, he left a marker behind. Along the way, they ran into a number of monsters. One was a snail big enough to block half the corridor. Writhing tentacles grew from its shell, and the mere sight of it sent a chill down his spine. He was less wary when he found out the tentacles were holding countless books. He dubbed them Cthulhu Snail. Of course. Later, they encountered a black slime creature. Similar to the snail, both creatures were grabbing books and drawing them into their bodies. As they slowly moved down the hall, it seemed like they had a purpose for their actions. Pretty much like reorganizing things. I mean, later on we do see that where they're trying to put books back and the monsters will come up and go, that's not where it goes, damn it. And they would go off to take it to where it actually needs to go. Like they're keeping it organized. But it's kind of odd that they would be doing that here unless their purpose right here is to bring the next book that is going to continue to be wrote in. That could be the case. There was also some knee-high black bipedal ants. While the ants spotted them, they didn't appear to be aggressive, instead disappearing off into the labyrinth. Being so used to aggressive monsters, it felt anticlimactic. It's like, for once, it's like they're not wanting to fight you, and you're like, damn it, let's fight. I need to fight. Especially for the other two individuals in the party. It was a nightmare stopping Edis and Ghislaine every time they rushed after to slay them. After an hour of cautious steps, and no traps to be seen, Rudius had them relax. It was nice that Orsted's information was accurate, and that he hadn't deceived them. At this rate, he was actually going to start trusting him. Then again, he already had experiences with a certain party that gained his trust just to stab him in the back. Not naming names, but their name starts with an M and rhymes with Sod. Mod? I don't know what this reference is. I'm guessing a JRPG that he's played because we haven't really had a situation, unless there is a story untold in the past where some dude named Mod, maybe when he was, adventuring, maybe some dude backstabbed him. But again, I'm going to assume it's probably a JRPG that he played where a character named Mod betrayed him. An hour later, 4 kilometers in, they found a dead end. Dead to endo. They found Rajerd? Rajerd's back? Yeah. That was a stupid joke, I know. The bend of the hallway was gentle enough that Rudius didn't think it was a complete circuit around the labyrinth yet. No info on King Ganas, just a mishmash of subjects and languages. One thing in common, though, was the publication date. They were all around the end of the Second Great Human-Demon War, 300 years ago. At this point, he had his party return to the split-off point. 2 paths led inward, and 2 led outward. He guessed the closest one was outward. After Sylphie suggested they check the inward one first, due to the fact the records being more recent, Riche chose that path, figuring it would be closer to the years of Gaunus' reign post-Laplace's war. Sure enough, based on Sylphie's keen eye, the books became more recent the further they went. Along with this, the bend of the hallway became more noticeable. He figured this meant that they were getting closer and closer to the center of the circle. Would a master be at the middle, or a guardian? That's where it's like, yeah, it starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. But I do like this because this is something like an overall observation that I have here. As I do like that this is sort of continuing that lore that we've established before. Recalling way back, they mentioned the idea that the demons are the ones that actually created the labyrinths. These are these places they built so they can store that mana and build up a place to stay. So it kind of gives credit here that yes, this demon king probably created this place. This is a labyrinth that they themselves built, and then they put themselves in the core. Now again, that was like that whole question mark discussion that we were getting into, or at least I was kind of diving deep into, was that question mark of why have this central core and why put a human into it. And my prediction there was that maybe a human themselves can sort of store energy. But I'm kind of curious about more about this labyrinth, and it's kind of a bummer that they sort of leave it at the end of this chapter. Is there a core here? Or did they not create a core and just they themselves stay there? At the same time, is there a way out? Is this place even built to have creatures come into it? Because typically what we've seen with the labyrinth so far, there's always a core. It's drawing in mana. Monsters and humans go towards the core. With this one, there's no indication there's even an entranceway, because they teleported in there. So this could be a case where this Demon King built this place specifically not to have anybody come there. And all the minions in it are built by them, and it's a place strictly for them to observe written content, write it down, and store it, and not to really care about having anybody in there. It's a really fascinating thing to kind of, again, continue that lore of the idea that the demons themselves actually created this. And this is one of our only examples of possibly a Demon King actually creating a labyrinth for their own purpose. Would the master be at the middle or a guardian? Orsa said the books were created by a book-loving demon, but perhaps that wasn't all. Maybe something else lived here. Considering his memories of the teleportation labyrinth, he didn't want to fight anything if he didn't have to. To curb his anxiety, he remembered the Laplace's war started about 400 years ago, so they shouldn't have to go all the way to the center to find that section. I mean, that would assume that the center would be the point in which it would be the furthest back in time, but that's not really the case because they end up being, I guess, yes, technically it could have been further in, because they'll end up running into the Demon King, and they're in this big area, and that's where we end up finding a lot of information that's actually more recent too, including Derek's diary. And the Demon King was there, so it's not like it's furthest back in time, but again, it could just be because the Demon King's there, not necessarily at the center point. The center point could, yes, technically be the start of any literature this Demon King has been able to find, or at least the point in which they first were born, or the furthest back of knowledge that they actually have. This place is kind of boring, Edis grumbled sullenly. This brought back memories. He had to try to warn her not to try anything funny simply because he was bored. Edis, I realize you're not having fun, but if you try anything... I know, Edis suddenly pulled her sword from its sheath. A split second later, Ghislaine also had hers out. That's kind of interesting. I always like those kind of subtle pointings out of things. Now, it could be that Edis is reacting, or at least is jumping conclusions quicker, but at least, again, kind of points out the idea that Edis noticed it first, and Ghislaine followed her suit. How many? Traveling with Reserve before, he knew this meant monsters were nearby. However, his eye of foresight didn't pick up anything yet. The next corner. To the left. At the back. Her pinpoint assessment surprised him. I can't say exactly how many there are, but there's a lot, added Ghislaine. Vague as usual. Did she forget about all of the lessons that he put together for her before? Reese went in first, quietly as possible. Looking around the corner, he seen a bunch of slimes and ants. The slimes were repeatedly coalescing before splitting off again. This made it impossible to tell how many there were. Good. Ghislaine hadn't forgotten her numbers after all. It's like she didn't even bother to count it, or she doesn't know how to count. Oh wait, okay, never mind. She's not dumb. Trying to figure out what they were doing, it seemed like the ants were carving into the rock. The slimes would then collect the rubble and consume it. After breaking it down, they would then reform it and spit it back up as new shelves. Basically, this library was a maze of hallways they created. That's a pretty cool thing, because yes, the assumption again is that the Demon King themselves would have created it. Like they created the labyrinth itself. But this is sort of implying that more possibly they could have assigned them to it after creating the labyrinth and just has them handling them while they're doing all the writing, but it's still really cool. I like to see these little integral details on how this stuff is created. Because yes, as we kind of mentioned before, with the whole situation with the, I forget what the stupid beast was called, the massive beast that died and created that entire village on Begarit. You had all these ants that were tunneling down and creating places to stay, and those turned into labyrinths. Doesn't look like there's any danger. The group nervously approached before sighing relief at the sight. So they were simply building more shelves. Orsa did tell me the monsters here were basically like familiars. I suppose that meant that they were a bit different from their typical beasts we've seen before. They traveled for what seemed like 5 hours, turning each corner and going inward. Many paths led to dead ends, and some intersections only had hallways leading outward. This made it impossible to reach the center, which this part leads me to believe that there's probably is an actual core to this place, and the Demon King is not part of that. So basically they built this labyrinth, they have a core there that's, feeding it mana or whatever, drawing in mana, and the Demon King themselves is living in the place and building elsewhere. And so they possibly designed it to where you can't get to the core because he doesn't want people getting the core and destroying it. Despite this, they were finding newer and newer books, so they were getting closer. At some point, they took a short break. Sylphie and Luke weren't doing too bad, But Ariel wasn't used to walking this much. She was a princess in every essence of the word. Meanwhile, the former noblewoman in our party was nearly bored to tears. That is one of those things that I don't want to forget to mention, but I was a little bit disappointed in this chapter because I felt like this was a prime opportunity to have Edis be able to fulfill the dream that she desired for Rudius, which, yes, technically, because this is a library labyrinth, it's difficult for her to be able to fulfill that. She does get some actions toward the end there, and maybe that's something that she'll be happy about afterwards, but I felt like this is like that. There was so much potential here for her to be able to have that dream fulfilled. This place really is nothing but books. I thought a labyrinth would be a little bit more interesting than this. Ghislaine, on the other hand, looked pleased, simply from the exercise walking this far. Edis, a labyrinth isn't a fun place. You don't think so? But it's the core part of adventuring. I always wanted to visit one, but this is lame. This is lame. You don't say. Rudius didn't have good memories of labyrinths. Paul died in one after all. He didn't want to experience something that traumatic ever again, unless there was a very compelling reason. He was content with not seeing another labyrinth in his life. Edis should have known what he'd been through, but he couldn't really fault her for her interest. Now here's an interesting part, because he says Edis should know what he's been through. Like, she should have known about the whole teleportation labyrinth and Paul dying. But then here in a minute, unless she's forgotten that, there's no indication that she knows that. Because yeah, that was my question mark. Does she know that what he's been through? Because yeah, you would assume, like, here in a minute, it sounds she's dredging up bad memories for him because she's excited about it, which is, I don't really find to be her fault. It's kind of one of those things where you, depending on who you're around, you don't mention certain things. So yeah, if you have somebody that possibly died in a car accident, you're not going to say how excited you are to drive and stuff, or race, or make a joke about car wrecks. It's kind of like one of those things where you sort of have to mold what you talk about around people based on sensitivities. But anyways, again, I don't know why it's mentioned here when there's no indication that Edis has been told about what happened. Because again, she just recently got here. And it's not like we had this moment where it said, okay, then they suddenly sat down and he explained everything that's happened so far. Hall's teeming with monsters, untouchable treasures just waiting to be discovered. And at the end of it all, a huge guardian monster. Edis, Sylphie interrupted. Let it go. Rudy lost his father in a labyrinth, you know. Huh? For a moment, Edis gaped in surprise. Oh, her face rapidly pale, lips pulled into a frown. She drew her brows tight and kept her eyes on the floor as she mumbled. Sorry. It's fine. You don't need to apologize. I know you've been looking forward to visiting a labyrinth since you were young. You don't mind? I just want you to keep in mind that there are truly dangerous labyrinths out there too. Ones that can rob you of the ones you love in a blink of an eye. Yeah, I got it. Edis bobbed her head. Years ago, she probably wouldn't apologize so earnestly. Again, this is where I like it, because again, going back to my previous statement, is the idea of walking on eggshells, basically. The idea that somebody has experienced something traumatic and you're excited about something that's involved with that. And there is that rudeness, I guess, that lack of empathy that you would have in talking about something despite their feelings. But I like the fact that Rudius kind of corrects this and says, it's fine. I know how exciting it is for you. I just want you to know the gravity of what you're kind of talking about. Know that there's dangers out there, and know that in an instant it can take your life. And that's more just an aspect of caution. You know, still your caution in the wake of something that you're excited about. Yes, you've always wanted to do this, but know that people die in these places. I lost my father that way. I don't want to lose any more, basically. But I do like the idea that he kind of acknowledges that anytime before, if she says something like that, she wouldn't apologize so earnestly. Like, basically the idea that she would just apologize to appease the crowd, or not apologize at all. Whatever. I'm going to do whatever I want. Turning the corner, they found an area that was ridiculously wide and cone-shaped. It had multiple levels, stairs sandwiched between stretches of shelves. It reminded him of the staggered seats in the Rome Colosseum. In the center was an enormous Slyme. Its body jiggled. Dozens of arms extended from the middle like tentacles, each one holding a pen and scribbling something at lightning speed. Only one of its appendages was different, pointing directly upwards. At its tip was an enormous eyeball, which glared at the ceiling. The second he seen this, he thought, crap. This was without a doubt the master of the labyrinth. They had unwittingly stepped within striking range of it. Behind him, Edis and Ghislaine were gawking as they drew their swords. What the heck is this thing? Luke blurted out what they were all thinking. It has to be the ruler of this place. Orsid told me that they were a bookworm demon king, but I wasn't quite picturing this. This one's different from Lord Badigatti. Rudius thought the same, but there was multiple different subspecies of demon. So it wasn't so strange that they would have a Slyme demon king, but a Slyme that enjoyed reading books? Okay, he wasn't going to judge. Yeah, this was one of those moments where I kind of assumed that this was going to be a case where, okay, he thinks it's the Demon King, but this could just be another minion of his that is producing the books. Yes, later on we find out that this is in fact the Demon King, or at least it says it's the Demon King. But it was kind of odd to kind of note that, yes, there's different shapes and sizes to them, which it sort of makes sense, but doesn't at the same time. This is sort of implying that a demon race can be a slime, and not necessarily that all demon kings have to be of a certain demon race. Yes, technically, the three that we know of is Kishirika, Bodigadi, and Etoff. And yes, technically, Bodigadi is nowhere physicality-wise the same as Kishirika, and they're both not the same at all as Etoff. Etoff has wings. So they're all different, technically, races of demons. It's just, I don't think we've ever established that slimes are demon. But it could just be the form that they've taken. If this is indeed a demon king, then should we not greet it? I wonder if it can even talk. There was many types of demons. Some had no vocal cords and thus couldn't speak. The slime might fall into that category. Past experience with the demon king also lent Rudius to feel that they didn't listen to people. What? Where does he get this? Granted, Bodigadi and Etoff were the only ones he'd ever met, but neither of them listened to others. Yeah, I guess technically Kishirika is not classified as... She's Demon Empress, I guess, not technically classified Demon King. I don't know. Semantics. But yeah, Etoff didn't listen, but Bodigadi did. I don't understand that. I mean, yes, in regards to Bodigadi just doing whatever he wants to do, like just going on his own whims. Yeah, in regards to the idea that if somebody told him to do something, he probably wouldn't do it. Like, he's just going to do whatever he wants to do. But I mean, he showed up at the party as doing something that he was told. So Bodigadi did listen. They couldn't judge the slime simply by looking at it, but it was probably safer to keep to themselves. Since it doesn't look like it noticed us, let's just try to keep that way and move quietly. Silence was a golden rule in libraries after all. Resuming their search, smaller slimes were moving around the area as well. They seemed to ignore them for the moment, but there was no telling what would happen if the larger slime spotted them. The familiars didn't look very powerful, but it was impossible to know for sure. Yeah, I think what they end up finding out later on, it's more of an aspect that power numbers. Power numbers. Ah! Sylphie gasped. What is it? It's here, Rudy. This area. Sylphie pulled a book from the middle of the shelf, titled King Ganas, Rise and Rang. Rias at the time was distracted by the giant slime, but apparently this area housed books written in the wake of the Laplace's War. They must have passed the period for the middle of the end of the Laplace's War, although it was unlikely that many put pen to paper during the conflict. Once victory was theirs, authors began to write all the stories about the affair. That's true. I mean, you're probably going to have that, okay, there's a lot of stories, and then suddenly the Laplace's War starts, and then suddenly, like, it just... People are fighting. People are fighting. They're trying to survive. Resources are cut down. You're not able to get much paper because they're using it for, messages in the war itself. There's a lot of reasons why, the authors won't be able to do much during that time. And then afterwards, once it's done, now it's time to talk about what happened. And I think that period of time right after the war would be like the juiciest information. That's where you're going to get the best accounts for what actually happened, rather than, again, later on, having a lot of that revisionist history happening. Or the man god telling people to write a different history. I never thought about that. Maybe the reason why there's so much revisionist history in the story is because the man god just tells authors, change that. Good point. Never thought about that. In that case, let's backtrack to the last dead inn and make camp there. Edis nodded. Yeah, I can't say that I want to sleep anywhere near that thing in sight. Agreed. Gives me shivers just looking at it, Ghislaine said. Really? Ariel tilted her head. I think it looks quite intelligent. I mentioned in the chat last Mushoku Mondays, like, everything that Ariel says, I think inappropriate thoughts. Like, not that I think inappropriate thoughts, I think of her thinking about inappropriate thoughts. I can't not see her thinking lewd things at all times. So she's looking at this slime and going, I want to get to know this thing better. I wonder what it can do. Oh, gosh. I just crossed her arms. Swords don't work too well on slimes like that, do they? A slime will die if you destroy his core, said Ghislaine. But that one is so enormous. Your sword won't even reach its core. Don't kill the Demon King. Ariel's comment was bizarre, but he was more troubled by the fact that Edis and Ghislaine were ready for battle. Still, everyone agreed that they should take their leave. He didn't want to linger near something that he knew nothing about. After a week passed, their group had moved between the camp and sections of books on Ganas. For days, they avoided the giant slime, snuck books out of view, took notes, and returned them. They realized that no amount of racket seemed to draw the owner's attention, so they did their research near the shelves instead. This left Edis and Ghislaine nothing to do. So they trained swords, or left to walk the area. He wanted them to be careful, not knowing if the place was entirely safe. But after the 5th day, he gave up on worrying about it. And that's when bad things happen. It's like one of those things of like, yes, technically they're spending literally a week here. So it's a lot of time to really get a sense of the feel of the place. But that's always a point in which you let down your guard and then something comes walking by. What if there's like a Tauros that's just like walking around this massive labyrinth and then finally after a week it finally arrives where you guys are at and attacks? You never know. There was plenty of material about King Ganas. Not surprising, given that he became a monarch of the country that won the war. He wasn't just a king of that era that followed Laplace's war. He was also one of many princes. Some stories said that he had dozens of brothers. Others said that he was the youngest of 3, especially those stories aimed at children. The only thing that they all agreed on was that he had 2 older brothers. This lined up with Ariel's knowledge. This is interesting. It is kind of interesting to note the idea that there's so many stories. They all have one commonality. He has 2 older brothers. But a lot of the story says that he has dozens of brothers. Only ones aimed at children says that he didn't have dozens of brothers. He just had 2 older brothers. Makes me believe that the true story is probably the fact that he had dozens of brothers. Because it's only whenever it's his children's stories that they simplify it to make it out that these are the 3 important people, Ganas and his 2 older brothers. The war accumulated into a decisive battle on the central continent's southern front, which resulted in the death of Asura's king, Ganas' father. Ganas took up the throne, and, while talented, he couldn't match his brother's strength and tactics. Despite this, he achieved victory, and literature stated that it was because of his numerous friends, the dragon god Urupin, North god Kalman, and armored dragon king Petagus, to name a few. Ganas went to them and prostrated himself, pleading with them to help them find a way to take down Laplace. 7 heroes answered the call and set off on a journey to defeat Ganas' sworn enemy. This matched what Rudius read in the legend of the Armored Dragon King. These books also said more about Petagus and his companions' adventure than King Ganas. Yeah, that was something that I kind of technically noted when I was reading this part is, when we had that whole story about or at least we were getting little snippets of it, there was never mention of King Ganas. And that technically, again, makes sense in the idea that when this big war happened, those are the heroes. They were technically the heroes, whereas Ganas, he was working behind the scenes. He was orchestrating behind the background. In a lot of these stories, you don't hear about the person that orchestrated things. You hear about the people that were on the battlefield, the ones that were in the front lines. Those are the hero stories. Those are the epic tales. Those are the sword fighting and battlefields and all that kind of stuff. That's the fun, interesting stuff. After the heroes left on their mission, King Ganas consolidated his power in Asura Kingdom and rode to meet Laplace's army. It was one defensive clash after another, a battle of attrition. This kept Laplace's army from destroying Asura until Petagus and the others returned. He really was the man behind the scenes. As for what kind of man he really was, the literature tended to be pretty unreliable. Most volumes described him as an exemplary ruler, peerless in his majesty, overflowing with talent. They never illustrated exactly why he possessed those qualities, despite showering him with compliments. Ariel was satisfied as it matched what she had heard, but as Rudius searched more, he found odd information mixed in. And this is all that stuff that Petagus said. So it's like, this shouldn't be a shock either. Ganas was a talentless alcoholic who snuck into the city to mess around, while his gifted elder brothers participated in the war effort. Apparently, he drank and got into fights almost daily. At first, Rudius thought that someone who hated the king and wanted to smear him wrote those. But these accounts gave specific examples of his behaviors and the dates that it took place. This made it more believable in his eyes than the praise that came with no concrete information. Yeah, it's getting specific. It's getting into the actual breakdown of what's actually happening. But again, shouldn't be a shock because this is legit what Petagus said. Still, while Rudius tried to dismiss it, it all changed when he found the most credible source of all, a diary written by King Ganas himself. That was a shock. Dated around the final years of Laplace's war, starting before his rise to the throne, when his brothers were still actively participating in the war. It painted a detailed account of Ganas Free and Asura's daily thoughts and past experiences. Ganas was a black sheep of the family, with no expectations of him, which pissed him off. This was due to his 2 genius brothers. Even if he complained about it, no one paid him attention. That's why he snuck out of the castle to hang out in the city all the time. The city wasn't the safest, as the war was going on, but that also made it perfect place for Ganas to vent his frustrations. He would drink until hammered, whine about how unfair everything was, then get into fights. There was no consequence for him beating up backstreet thugs. Rudius had one word to sum up Ganas at that time: garbage. It sounds like your future self, Rudius. It sounds like your future self, Rudius. After reading it, Ariel was shocked and spent half a day slumped over. Even now, she leaned against the shelf with her legs pulled to her chest, her expression dark as she mumbled, "Is this it? Is this the King of Kings that Lord Petagus is searching for?" Again, Lord Petagus said this was him. Obviously, it's something else there. This is one of those moments where it's like, are you guys not seeing the same thing I'm seeing? Are you guys not hearing the same thing I'm hearing? I'm pretty darn sure you were there, Ariel. It's obviously whatever comes out after that. Because Pedigus said that, yeah, he was a deadbeat, blah, blah, blah. But then something else. I think he kind of implied then something else happened. Something else grabbed his attention. And it was probably obviously that point that King Ganas went out and sought them and prostrated himself and begged them to help him out. He probably said something at that point. Or it was surely the fact that he rose to he rose to it. He had this reason. He stood up. He took action. Luke and Sylphie tried to help regain her composure, but their voices were strained from the shock as well. To Rudius, great king or not, Ganas was a human being first and foremost. Rudius is like, you guys are all shocked by this? I've been there. I can relate to this dude. I've been there. He was a human being first and foremost. So this behavior wasn't a surprise to him. If anything, it made him more easy to relate to. And I think that's another thing that kind of adds to the whole thing. This is a person that's human. Makes sense. Though Rudius had to admit that his behavior wasn't very kingly. And you just got done telling Ariel that she had to take a break because she's human too. And now here's like, well, that's not very kingly. Still, Pedigus had seen fit to support someone like Ganas. Perhaps Ganas, being a garbage human being, might actually be a hint. It's one of those things where I think it's more of the aspect that he's not just stuck in the palace. He was somebody that was actually like mingling with the people. Maybe that was part of it. Thus, Rudius continued his search, which led him to an intriguing book on blessed children. Here's some fascinating stuff. There was like a little nugget of like thrown in here, which kind of caught me by surprise. Which again, kind of leads itself to what this place is. I mean, Rudius kind of mentions it later, like, man, I wish I can kind of go back there. Because this place is going to be full of a wealth of knowledge. This is going to be that information like the whole situation with Nanahoshi. This is where that information would probably be at if they can find it. The problem still remains, it probably take a normal human their entire lifetime to find probably something they're looking for. Rudius just gets lucky here in a minute. And it's lucky that they have a time frame to look at. If they were looking at for a specific topic, impossible. Unless they knew exactly when that topic, again, would have been brought up into the public. The book covered which blessed children were discovered at the time, what powers they possessed, and what kind of people they were. None seemed to have anything to do with Ganas, at least not until he came to an article describing the powerless blessed children. What? Here we go. It does make me kind of wonder why this is kind of being brought up here. When I was reading this point right here, I started getting massively speculating into Ariel and Ganas and all that kind of stuff. Quickly jumped in my head. I'm like, I never thought of that. What if the possibility that the reason why Ganas was able to manipulate or at least get their help, these heroes, maybe the reason why he was able to get Pedagus's help was because he has a voice like Ariel. I've been hitting on this over and over again. I think I even talked about it in the last Mushoku Mondays. My assumption that Ariel is a blessed child and that her voice controls people, charms them. And so, I don't know why it never dawned on me, but there's a possibility because she's a bloodline assuming bloodline of Ganas, direct bloodline, that possibly she got that same blessed child ability from him. Now, they've never indicated that blessed children will pass it on to the next generation. If that was the case, I think that, people like Zenoba's father would probably find some way of forcing Zenoba to make children so they can have an army of Zenobas. But maybe there's a possibility still that there is a way of passing down the power of blessed children to a bloodline. So, again, maybe that's a possibility of why Ganas was able to make Pedagus help him. In which case, maybe the idea here is that Ariel needs to find out how to use that. Specifically, use it on Pedagus. Because it may be a possibility that it works so easily on most people, it's just not working on Pedagus, and it's maybe because she's not controlling it well enough. Anyways, this pure, powerless blessed child, which is a completely different subject, which I thought was really, really fascinating. This made Rudius imagine the opposite of Zenoba. Powerless suggested that a person was frail and wimpy. Despite his impressions, the power described was deemed very dangerous. Enough that the text emphasized that anyone possessing it should be killed immediately. A powerless blessed child could disable other blessed children's powers. This was a common thing that Rudius found in light novels. And in most cases, a person with no other abilities but the ability to disable others' powers. This put them at a disadvantage, and others looked down upon them. But in these series, like 90% of the central characters possess superpowers. So the ability to notify their abilities was a game changer. Yeah. So, this is like one of those moments where it's like, when was this wrote? When was Mushoku Tensei? When was this volume of Mushoku Tensei wrote? What, like, I would assume like 2013, 2015. There's a lot of shows now, anime at least, a lot of anime out now where this is literally it. Like every single one of these isekai shows is a guy that has the ability to stop somebody else's other ability. And it is kind of a trope that is so annoying. The weakest person has the ability to stop everybody else. I mean, here recently, to give an example, a Returner's Magic had the ability to hack other people's abilities. Naturally, this rare gift was typically something the main protagonist had. Blessed children were so rare in this world, however, that there was probably only a handful of them. Being able to nullify their abilities didn't seem to be that potent. In fact, Rudius felt like it was extremely useless. It would be way better to have a Sword God-style warrior at your side than someone like that. That said, other blessed children tend to be the authority figures in respected countries. They could create miracles with the powers that one normally couldn't do with ordinary magic. For that reason, it would be a disadvantage to one country if their blessed child's power was snuffed out. So these countries would see that another country having a powerless blessed child a nuisance, while the country they were in would deem them a worthless liability that would only put them under foreign scrutiny. Thus it was advised to kill such a child immediately. That's so messed up. That is so messed up. Yeah, because you have this, because you were born with this, we have to kill you. Which does make you kind of wonder, how would you know? Like, how would a country know? Again, the idea... I'm going to get more into the details of this, but yes, in wake of what we're suggesting here, what Rudy says, there's a handful of them. So you're talking about maybe like one person in each region of the world. And thus, yes, technically, being able to send this powerless blessed child into this place that has one that has the ability to revive people, they would be able to snuff it out. But how would you know if they had that ability? How would you know they're a blessed child? Unless there is, in the past, a way to be able to find or identify those that are blessed children. What if there is like with the floating fortress? What if there is this archway that you can create that everybody has to step through and it tells them if they're a blessed child or not? Or somebody has the ability to identify, maybe a demon eye that is able to identify it. But then that question kind of brings up the bigger thought process that I have in the idea of how would they know? What if there's a possibility that blessed children and cursed children, again, one and the same, what if people with some sort of ability in the past was more numerous? What if there was a lot of people that were blessed children back in the day? That could explain why they were sought after and taken out. I'm kind of sad that Rudius doesn't mention how many they're listed, because he says that this book identifies all the current ones that exist, but he doesn't say how many. I would have liked the idea if they actually mentioned how many, because then that would have kind of explained that ordeal. But then again, obviously the reason why they're bringing this up is the possibility of Rudius somehow finding, or at least creating, a blessed child that can be a powerless blessed child. Because the hope is that he can be able to remove curses, things deemed curses, with like, Orsted or something like that. Or fix anomalies in mana with cases like Zenith, if that is a case of something of a mana that is disturbing in there and it's constantly disturbing, that it can be swept away. He kind of brings that up as a possibility later on. So it's bringing up a lot of interesting question marks around that I would love to see more information about. And yes, I do acknowledge that I did say the idea they were advised to kill the children immediately, and that's literally what happens with a lot of these cases. I mean, we did have the whole situation where they were going to assassinate that blessed child down in Millis. So yeah, it's more the idea of just this thing is a threat to us in our structure. The power described did catch his interest, though. Powerless blessed children could apparently also dispel powers of cursed children. They were the same after all, the title being assigned based on it being beneficial or not. It made Rudius wonder if this ability could nullify other things, like regular curses. Since it didn't explicitly say it was the case, he assumed Powerless's abilities couldn't cure curses. But maybe he needed to look at the bigger picture. Blessed children possess all kinds of different abilities. Every single one broke the natural laws of the world. It seemed plausible that one amongst them could erase curses, or turn back the hands of time. This is where he starts to get into Zenith. In other words, with the right blessed child's power, they might be able to return Zenith's memories to her. That was merely wishful observation, but it was worth asking Orsted about that when he returned. I like that we're finally getting back to Zenith. finally getting back into Zenith. It's been so long since we've actually talked about that elephant in the room, the curse, the messing up of her mind. It is interesting that he's saying both the concept of a curse, erasing a curse, or specifically turning back time. I guess the idea of the turning back time, it could be an aspect of trying to unravel what was damaged in her mind. Because yes, they've already mentioned the idea that healing does so many things and it heals bodies and it returns flesh back to normal, but it unfortunately couldn't do anything for the mind. That was the only thing that for some reason, the mind was the only thing that healing could not fix, which has always been an oddity. But it is an interesting direction for it to take it, in the idea that in the wake of this information, his mind immediately goes to, yeah, technically these blessed, cursed children have all these crazy abilities that all seem to break the natural laws of the world, like Zenoba being insanely powerful. Why couldn't there be one possibly that could help me with my situation with Zenith? Because every now and then he'll come up with that, okay, I need to figure out what's the next step for Zenith. And he always puts it off, and he even does it here in a minute. He keeps shelving that. That's not important right now. We got to do this. That's not important now. I am kind of curious if at some point he's going to actually jump up in his own head and say, I keep putting this off. I keep focusing on all this other stuff. Now, granted, in a lot of cases, he doesn't have a choice. It's, again, the whole situation with somebody trying to kill Roxy and then going into killing Orsted and then working for Orsted and now with Ariel. There's always something that's coming up that's not necessarily something he has a choice to put on hold. Zenith is one that he always puts on hold because it's not important right now, or at least it's not dire right now. She's stable, as he kind of puts it in a minute. So it does make sense that he does put on hold. But I'm curious at what point he's gonna be like, I gotta stop doing. I have some time. Fix this, because driving ends are crazy. Realizing that he should jot it down in his diary as to not to forget, he closed the book and brought out his diary. He had reservations about continuing his journal after reading his future self's version, but it had saved his skin. While he had no intentions of returning to the past, he figured that he might want to entrust it to someone in the future, like passing on his will, a person benefiting from the guidance of all the information included. Just make sure to cut out all those lewd thoughts about your wives, because I bet he writes about them a lot. We did this in the bed today. Let's see. I discovered that blessed children can have a number of different abilities. There are even those that can manipulate the abilities of other blessed children and cursed children. Perhaps I'd be able to achieve something, even if that thing seems impossible, using these powers. There. Good enough, I think. Lifting his head, he noticed the Slyme in the middle of the hollow, wriggling around as always. It startled him at first, and still no less terrifying, but it hadn't done anything to them. It spent all day staring up at the ceiling and copying books. That meant that it was at least intelligent. Hold on a second. I might be able to achieve something, even if it seems like it's impossible? Isn't that a little bit too vague? Maybe I should write a specific example of what I might use those powers for. He was never detailed up to this point. Maybe being in this labyrinth encouraged him to change his ways. I like this because, yeah, this is one of those, okay, going back to the future Rudius diary. The reason why that diary sucks so much is that it had all this information about, like, I did this crazy epic thing. I did this. I achieved this. I have this power. But it never explained how. So, to the detriment of the current Rudius, he can't pull any information. And even Orsted mentioned that. There's a lot of cool information there, but it doesn't say how. So, it's useless. And so, now Rudius himself is going, okay, maybe I should be a little more detailed. Maybe because then it's going to be completely useless if I just do that. But he's pointing out specifically, I need to be more detailed. Otherwise, if I'm too vague, it's not a good reminder. And I completely relate to this because I've had so many points where I will write down notes. Like, I'll go, crap, I gotta write this down. I'll type something up. I'll leave a specific note. But I'm overly vague because I know that I know what I'm talking about. But then cut forward like several weeks or months, and then you go back to those notes, and suddenly you realize, now I don't know what I was talking about. It is one of those things where you can be vague in the current moment and still know what you're talking about, and it kind of leaves your memory is suddenly like, is too vague. He tore out the page and replaced it with another one, which he used to write his current thoughts. It would be great if he had correctional fluid, but how would he make it? Maybe smear white paint? Glancing up, he noticed giant Slyme tore out a page from the book that it was writing in. Staring silently, it made him wonder. This is kind of cool. Just to be sure, he scribbled a random sentence, and the Slyme mimicked it. Blanking out an entire page, it did the same. It was copying him? Or rather, what he wrote? If it liked books, it must be able to read. It had no mouths or ears, but it did have a giant eye. He debated consulting Ariel first, but she was at her wit's end, already ready to give up and go home. It was worth a gamble at this point. Yeah, I can see Ariel breaking at this point because it's not really necessarily that they came here knowing they would get an answer. What she was told was that Orsted said, hey, there's this library, you might be able to find the information you're looking for. And again, I don't like the idea that she's so broken now because it literally is what Petagoose told her. So it's not a shocker. But still, I can see this being something that would defeat her. But hey, maybe the answer Why be distraught right now? Maybe the answer is just get drunk and start swinging at Pettigoose. I can see this like this meeting, like they get back to the Fleeing Fortress and they come in there and there's this, you know, Pettigoose is up on the throne, is like, you wanted to an assembly with me, and she comes in there and she's just like swigging down. Hold on a second, swigging down, and then she starts going after Pettigoose. How's this? Is this what you wanted? This is what you wanted, what? Anyways, sorry, dumb. It was worth a gamble at this point. Let's see then. He began to pen his journal. Good day to you, Demon King. A pleasure to make your acquaintance. I'm Rudy's Grey Rat. This is an incredible library that you have here. A tentacle immediately started racing across the page before freezing suddenly. Not only that, but its arms stopped altogether. An eerie air settled over the area. You made it bad. Was he being hasty? For a second, he lost his nerve, but it was too late to regret it now. He's like, here we go. Whatever happens, right? The slime eyeball turned towards him. It was huge and could clearly see him gaping at it. The slime shrunk back for a moment before shooting out tentacles outward at incredible speed in all directions. Using an eye of foresight, he could see one coming straight towards him. Ducking, assuming that it was going to impale him, Reese was surprised to see that it stopped right in front of him. It had a piece of paper attached to it with a message on it. I am Demon King Bitoff... Forgot about that stupid name. Bitoff Tovatha of the Nen tribe. Welcome to my castle. Future author in the making. Successful communication. Rius mentally pumped his fist. He's like, yes. But he came up with this on the fly. Now what? It's like, what do we talk about? Communication has been established. All right, now what? He hastily scribbled his reply. My deepest apology for not paying proper respect sooner. It's truly an honor to meet you, Your Majesty. We came here in hopes of researching a certain subject. Would you be willing to permit us to stay here for the meantime? It replied, yes. Now you can breathe a sigh of relief after being on edge this whole time. Unless it's deceiving you. This is going well, but he should have alerted Edis before trying something rash. Still, interesting name. It sounded like a composer. Orsid had said that Demon King wasn't such a bad guy, so it seemed like he was right. Again. He's like, this Orsid guy's not deceiving me for once. I'm so used to this man god person. He then wrote, actually, we're looking for a certain book. It replied, find it yourself. Good for you. Want a cookie? Cool story, bro. That was cold, but they were strangers. Can't blame him after asking for outlandish demands. At least it wasn't chasing them out. However, the slime continued. You have managed to amuse me. I didn't even think about this. I don't even know why I didn't think about this. This should have been like an immediately something that popped in your head. I guess the moment that it indicated that it was reading diaries. Because my assumption when they first came here was that it was writing books like literature, novels, published things. Not everything written in the world is basically being wrote by this thing. I mean, nothing indicates that it's everything, but it, again, at least novels and ledgers and diaries. But I assume it's everything. Bruce wrote in reply, did I say something funny? You came here carrying a book from the future. That was truly shocking. And now you're currently writing a continuation of its contents as we speak. If you don't call it interesting or entertaining, then what is? As a reward for amusing me, I will grant you one wish. That is so freaking cool. What's funny here is that it's specific, and this could be a translation thing. I always acknowledge this whenever I bring this up. It was interesting that it's saying you brought a book from the future. It's not saying a diary, so it's not like he's writing what he thinks is a diary. He's just assuming that Rudius wrote a book, and his future self brought it back in time, which does make sense why it would know that it was from the future, because literally he's looking for books, and then suddenly out of nowhere, bam, something appears, and it's already wrote. And yeah, the possibility that he sees the contents of it and that it is something past what was written over here. So he's been writing Rudius' diary. And then suddenly, boom, this other one appears, and it's been wrote already. So the assumption there is that this is a future one. And now this one's being wrote again. So it makes sense that this thing is going, yeah, that's the case. Very interesting. He must be referring to the diary of his future self. Bruce didn't physically bring it to the library, so it probably copied it when it arrived in this timeline. From the perspective of the slime, his current journal was a sequel to the previous one. It made sense that it found it entertaining. That aside, it seemed that Demon Kings loved to reward good deeds by granting people's wishes. Was this part of their culture or something? I have always wondered that. I think, yes, obviously Kishirika is sight. I think a lot of people have said that Bodigadi is knowledge, which kind of makes sense because when Bodigadi first showed up, he was telling Rudius about things that we never knew before. He would sit down and go, yeah, let me tell you about this and this and this and this. But I think that's wrong now, obviously, because Bitoff here obviously seems like knowledge. So Kishirika sight, Bitoff knowledge, Etoff strength, Bodyguardy, I assume clarity? Yeah, the only thing I think is clarity, guidance, or something like that. Basically the concept of instilling upon somebody what is actually important. Yes, technically, again, Bodyguardy did tell him information, but I can't not see Bitoff being the one that bestows knowledge. Now, granted, Bodyguardy and Bitoff could be both knowledge, but I think what Bodyguardy would be is probably clarity. But it is interesting. It does kind of make you wonder if each one of these demons, again, acknowledging that Kishirika is Empress, if each one, if maybe those that are deemed as being kings, they have to do that. Like, this is part of their culture. A wish? You'll grant me anything I want? It wrote in reply, the only thing that I, Bitoff Toatha, am capable of doing for you is search for a book that you seek. Given the type of creature that he was dealing with, he couldn't expect riches or immortality. But what book should he ask for? Singling out a volume would be difficult. He'd have to know the title to ask for something specific. They already searched for the literature on Ganas, but they still hadn't found the key that they needed. He thought about giving up on searching for something Ganas related, and instead look for a book that would shine a light on curing Zenith's condition. It was so close. Yes, that would be great, Rudius. Given the vast knowledge here, there may be information to treat her. Then again, it's equally possible there wasn't. He corrected himself, as he wasn't here to search for a way to heal Zenith. You could do both. Why not both, Rudius? His priority was Ariel, and he came here to help her. Zenith weighed on his mind, but her condition was stable. He couldn't get distracted. If Orsted started to see him unreliable, he may abandon him. The man god might take the opportunity to massacre his entire family. He needed to avoid that at all costs. Zenith was important, but couldn't be his first priority. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. That's a big oof right there. Yes, technically, yeah, that would be great to be able to find some sort of information on Zenith and how to cure her. But again, it's one of those aspects. This is not a priority. It's stable. It's under control. But this right here is not. The man god, Orsted, Ariel, this stuff is volatile right now. It's chaotic, and I need to control it. Remember in the picture that Orsted gave him, he likely anticipated they wouldn't find what they were looking for. In that case, he may have intended for him to show up to the Demon King. He did mention that he could see the future, or something like that. I do kind of wonder about that. If Orsted can see a past of Rudius, a future past of Rudius, and again, it doesn't seem like he can because a lot of the things that's happening is things that he unforeseen. I would like you to look for a book that has a cover like this. It replied, very well. Handing it over a split second later, the Slyme plucked a volume from one of the shelves in the room. Apparently, the volume had been right nearby after all. It drew the book into its body, and then brought it down one of the tentacles before Rudius. Rudius expected it to be covered in slime goop, but it was dry. It shouldn't be a surprise, as the slime was a bookworm, and it would care for them properly. Glancing down, it had a red leather cover, adorned with trees bearing fruit. It was thick, and the pages covered in writing that was squished tight from margin to margin. Your wish has been granted, it wrote. Take your time and enjoy reading it. It then retracted its tentacles and resumed copying work once more. Rudius was concerned that another book would have the same cover, but then he noticed that there was the same scribblings on the edge. Sitting down, he cracked it open. He barely made several lines before he gasped. This book is. Well, not sure if it could have clues of what they needed, he was certain he needed to show it to Ariel. This is actually quite a shocker. And again, it goes to that whole thing of like, how the hell did Orsted know this? And again, he technically, because he's seen his life. If their thought process that Derek was important here, and he thinks about Derek, he could probably see that past of Derek writing in that journal and then go, okay, that could probably have the information we need, and he can write it down. He can draw the picture, basically. So it makes sense, but I didn't think he was going to get... my predictions last Mushoku Monday was the idea that this is going to be something that Rudius was going to look at way later. Back at the camp, Ariel was sitting, hugging her knees to her chest. Gillian was on guard while the others were gone. Stepping in front of Ariel, since she was wearing a skirt, he was able to see her underwear in plain view. While Edis and Sylphie might not be watching, he still tried to avert his eyes. This was forbidden territory. Oh, Lord Rudius. You must be exhausted, Your Highness. My apologies for letting you see me like this. She adjusted her posture to a more graceful one. Farewell, blissful white underwear. Our time together was short. Princess Ariel, I found something good. Something good? What could that be? Something I think will excite you. What could that be? A sensual novel pinned around the time Osra Kingdom was founded? That would excite her, he thought. Oh, pardon me. I digress. What is it that you have? Being mentally backed into a corner, She was babbling all kinds of strange things that were amusing. He kind of wanted to leave her in that state a little longer, but they didn't have much time until they had to head to Asra. Ariel's eyes went wide as she glanced at the cover. These things hanging down from the tree. It's the bat emblem. So they were bats, not fruit. Anyways, please go on and read it. I promise that'll be more exciting to you than a sexy novel. Ariel furrowed her brow skeptically before finally opening the first page. She gasped in realization after reading the first few lines. This was Derek Radbat's. Oh my gosh, dude. That was not what I was thinking. Again, my whole mindset there was that it was going to be something completely unrelated. But again, it makes sense because Orsted could see when he was writing that journal. And so sure enough, if their thought process is that Derek is the one that resolved this issue, even if he doesn't have any information on Ganas, which I would assume that he would. You would assume that if he knows about Derek Redbat writing a journal, that he would have information about Ganas writing a journal. But maybe it's the fact that he figured that it was going to be more easier to find a journal from Ganas than it would be Derek Redbat. So again, here is a backup plan, essentially. They're going to find where this stuff is, and they'll probably find out where that journal is. But Derek Redback's journal, that's completely different. I mean, it might be one of those things where, yes, he does see some sort of future there, but it's not in finding that journal. And thus, it might be something they need to find. But I don't think that he would say, you know, in case you don't find it, then don't worry about it. It would probably be, you're probably going to need to look for this eventually. But yes, it was Derek Redback's diary. A diary was records of the mundane going-ons of everyday life. It allowed a brief summary of happenings, simple and to the point, while also expressing the emotions of one's feelings at the time. It wasn't just a series of events, but a record of feelings. That is definitely true. And again, I kind of equate that to what Rudius was mentioning earlier, where he was very brief about his descriptions, because why would you overly describe things when it's for you and you're going to be able to tap back in those memories? But it also makes sense that typically whenever you're writing a diary, it's not just to say, I went to work, I did this. Often cases, it's I went to work and I was not feeling it. I was very upset there, whatever. What angered them, brought them to tears, made them laugh, got pleasure, pain, hate. They were records, both detailed and yet vague. Derek's diary never had him mention his own name. He wrote daily about Ariel and Luke. It was an ordinary, casual journal, one you might find anywhere else in the world. It was for this very reason that his true thoughts were contained within. There was an intense pride in his words, beyond what would be expected. It was shocking at how he truly believed in Ariel at his core. No one else Rudius knew could match it, and Rudius knew all too well how much charisma she possessed. He's like, I know so many people that are enamored by her because of her charisma, and nobody thinks she's fit this much. Ariel began combing through the book, devouring every word, quietly and methodically. Rudius decided that he'd wait nearby until she finished. As he watched her, Sylphie, Luke, and Edis returned. They were carrying armfuls of books, a mountain of material regarding Ganas. Noticing him staring at Ariel, Sylphie and Edis' expressions soured. At least until they noticed how absorbed Ariel was at the book that she had. Sylphie spoke up. Rudy, what's going on? I found an interesting book, so I'm having Princess Ariel read it. Oh, what book is that? Derek Redbat's diary. Luke's jaw dropped before responding. Come to think of it, he did write in that thing practically every day. You should consider reading it afterwards as well. Yeah, guess so. Though I'm sure he didn't have nice things to say about me. Rudy shrugged, assuming that it would be something that he'd find out himself. Anyway, he's like, he knows. Anyways, I didn't think about it. That's weird. Again, most of this stuff is just manuscripts. It's just piles of papers that are bound together and not really hardbound. This thing has a cover. I really am kind of curious what dictates being actually bound and in a hardcover or not. Now, granted, yeah, because it's actually a leather cover. Like, this thing was actually bound by something, not just papers. Maybe certain ones aren't actually bound until they know it's completed. That's very curious. I'm very curious as to which ones get bound and which ones don't. Unless the cover is important in some cases, then it creates them. Or maybe it's just over time, those covers are created. It could be that I'm misjudging, because when they first arrived in, they had a bunch of stuff that was not bound, and he found one that was bound, and it was a ledger for the Demon Continent. So a lot of the stuff that he found there, when he was describing these, maybe a lot of that stuff there was from specifically the Demon Continent, where it's a little more difficult to actually bind something. And it technically could be an aspect that most things that are wrote don't actually get hardbound. Hard binding something in a setting like this is something really only for the rich. People that can actually afford to have something actually bound with a hard bound. Again, I could have been drawing wrong conclusions there. Anyways, it's incredible that you were able to find something that specific. Yeah, well, I sort of have a thing for diaries. Reese opted not to share that he found it from the intel from Orsted. It was true that he had connections to diaries. One he wrote, one Ganas had, and now Derek read bad. After a while, Ariel finished, closing the book with a snap. Her expression was devoid of any real emotion, and it was difficult to read. She was obviously feeling something given her blushing cheeks and misty eyes. Princess Ariel, Luke immediately went to her, taking a knee at her side. Oh, Luke, you should read this too. As you wish. Ariel handed the book to Luke before turning to Rudius. Hesitation in her eyes had vanished completely. She must have discovered something an outsider wouldn't have caught. Whatever it was, it would probably be something Derek would have told her directly if alive. It hurts. The idea of reading something of somebody that has passed, freaking hurts. It hurts so much. Especially if in a case of, I don't have experience of this, but I can see it being especially difficult for somebody that you didn't pay attention to that beloved you. A case of acknowledging that you missed out on something, really. Well, Princess, were you pleased with it? Yes, you did an excellent job finding it. I now know the answer to Lord Pedagoose's question. I don't know what it'd be. Again, it doesn't really give too much emphasis here besides what they're going to talk about later on. Let me wait till I get to that part. There was strength in her eyes, and Rudius could only nod silently. Preparing to head home, Sylphie and Rudius started returning books, while Edis, Ghislaine, and Luke cleaned the campsite. There was no drop-off, so they had to return them to where they found them. It was a difficult task, and something he failed numerous times, as Slymes would snatch the books from the shelf and return them to rightful place. Like, you've done it wrong. It's not where it goes. It's not where it goes. He thought about entrusting the task to the Demon King's minions, but leaving a bunch of books behind without putting them back would be bad etiquette. The library, admittedly, had a terrible organization system, but it did contain a wealth of information. There might become a day that he'd need to return. It was in his best interest to mind his manners. Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. It's like, yeah, if you know where you're looking, it's like, gosh, there's so much information there. It's not even funny. It is literally the perfect library. Again, not just published books. We're talking everything that has ever been wrote down. You could technically find, I don't know, what if somebody was applying to kill somebody, and they wrote down on a note to send to somebody, like an assassin or something like that, and they acquire it, they read it, and they burn it. It's not gone. Because this Demon King wrote down. When they were writing it saying, I want you to come to Ostra Kingdom and kill this person, it's wrote down in this library. It's somewhere in there. There's a page somewhere. It's crazy. Staying on the Demon King's good side might lead him to finding another book for him. That in mind, they managed to return all the books and made it back to the campsite. Edis was bored out of her mind. Ghislaine was meditating. Ariel sat gracefully next to Luke, waiting for him to finish. And Luke was holding Derek's journal with tears in his eyes. I can't believe this. His hands trembling as he turned the pages. I was such an idiot. Luke, that goes for both of us, Your Highness. Ariel smiled as tears broke from him. Her face strained as she watched him. Reese had read some of the diary and knew what Derek thought of Luke. None of them was good, at least on the surface. He even wrote what a rotten brat Luke was, teaching Ariel nothing but bad behavior. Yet it was clear from the way that he wrote just how deep his affection was for Ariel. Derek could sense that, despite Luke's youth, the boy had a knack for dealing with people. If Luke started using his natural talent on men, as well as women, he could climb the ranks and have followers of his own someday. I never thought about this. Yes, technically Luke is good at swaying women. And remember, back when Luke confronted Rudius about helping Ariel, what did he say? Damn, he looks like this. He looks like this tragic hero sitting there. I can see why women are swayed by him. It's mainly because Luke was naturally upset at that moment, but he could use that on somebody. If Rudius is seeing this, he can use that on others. He can sway other people. Simply put, Derek expected great things from him in the future. Even as he complained about his ridiculous preoccupation with women, he seen potential behind that veneer. I have to admit, I don't know why Rudius would have this much knowledge, because again, it indicated that he opened it up, he read like a little bit, then closed it up and went to Ariel. Handed it to her, she read the whole thing, and then gave it to Luke. So how would Rudius know all this? It is a little weird. Maybe this is kind of one of those things of like, it's technically like something that he knows later on, but whatever. Or maybe Ariel told him some of this stuff while he was cleaning up. If Derek was still alive, Ariel and Luke might not be so passionate about taking the throne as they are now. But if he could see them now, he would probably be more than happy to lend them his aid. That said, if he was here, Sylvie would have no place with them. Derek had watched them both closely and had great expectations for what they would accomplish. This is so much oof. It is, this hurts. This hurts. Like I said, this is literally them reading what they didn't see. They didn't see how much he cared for them. And again, it goes back to that point that was made in the previous chapter. This idea that this was a nagging dude. He was constantly nagging them, saying, oh, do this, stop messing around. They didn't see why he was saying that. It's because he's seen so much potential in them. Luke can control people and sway them and capture their hearts. Ariel has something there. I'm very curious to see what that is, other than the idea that he just has expectations for her. Luke is getting into details, and it's in the idea that he can sway people. Maybe that's Ariel too. Her charisma. She's able to swoon people. Maybe that's why he's seen that. I mean, I think he mentioned that in that chapter with Derek, that she had the ability to capture people. Glancing to Sylvie beside him, Rui's seen her face pulled into a conflicted expression, watching her friends. Maybe this wasn't a happy development where she was concerned. This is one of those moments. This is a big, massive Rudius L moment. This is like just a bunch of like nasty speculation. And I just like, do you just hate your wife that much? Like, this is such... I can see, this goes back to old Rudius. I know, this goes back to old Rudius and always expecting the worst out of people. And so he just putting himself in Sylvie's shoes and expecting that, oh yeah, this is probably crappy for her. She had considered herself a founding member of the group, but this diary dispelled that notion. He considered pulling her close and stroking her head, reminding her that she had him. But he got the feeling that it wasn't what she needed right now. Sylvie plucked up the courage, stepped forward, and kneeled before her friends. Hey, you two. Sylvie. They both had an awkward expression as they looked at her. They'd done nothing wrong, but Ruiz understood their feeling of guilt. They'd always treated her as if she'd been there from the start. Ruiz's stomach nodded in anxiety at what they would say. Again, stupid speculation, Rudius. This Derek person, when we get back home, could I ask you to tell me more about him? Since it seems like he had such great expectations for you both, I'd like to know more about him. Of course, Luke nodded. In fact, I want you to know more about him. He was the first person to recognize Princess Ariel's true potential. Ariel was silent, but smiled as if to agree. Sylvie grinned at the reply. Reese clapped his hand over his mouth, watching them filled him with emotion. Oh! He remembered Sylvie's younger years in Buena Village, always by herself, bullied by the other children. He was the only friend she had, and the thought that he might leave the village filled her eyes with tears. But now, the lonely girl had such amazing friends. He hadn't done anything to help her along. Ariel and Luke were friends Sylvie made on her own. Well, it was through conflict too, but yes, they gained like pure trust of each other. He admittedly was a little sad to realize that she no longer belonged to him alone, but this was a good thing. He was certain. Something he wouldn't have thought so in the past. Neither him nor anyone else should be watching over her as a protector. She needed to be an equal, both in relationship and her friendships. She managed to cultivate relationships on her own. She was also trying her best to stand equal footing with Rudius too. That means he needed to match her efforts. Yes, this is a stark contrasting example of what she was and what she is now. And I think we all kind of seen that in the Fitz arc. It was pretty much showing us that this girl is no longer the weak Sylvie of the village. She stood on her own feet. She became very powerful, took down enemies, gained friends. And yes, there was some doubts in there about Ariel and how she manipulated people, but that didn't bother her. Ariel was her friend. When it came to friendships and equals, the first people that came to mind were Cliff and Zenoba. He had to match them. He had to be their bestest friends. Always bestest friend Zenoba, for sure. But Cliff, good boy. Hey, Rudius. Edis was at his side, bumping her elbow against his. Was she jealous that his eyes were glued to Sylvie this whole time? He wouldn't leave her out. They were married now. So, he would shower her with just as much. Edis was glancing behind them. Rudius gasped at the sight of an enormous number of slimes and ants. All were gleaming red eyes. Of course. They were clearly pissed. Filed it. They spoke in groans, though it was hard to tell how they produced the noise. They were slowly approaching. Why were they angry? The books were returned to the proper places. While we didn't know where Derek's diary went, he was planning on, handing it to the Demon King and pay his respects. You defiled it. You defiled it? What did we defile? A book? Oh, turn to look. He was staring at the army of monsters, mouth agape. His tears had soaked onto a page, making the ink bleed so much that the words were indistinguishable. "I'm terribly sorry," Luke hastily apologized, snatching a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing the book. "No, Luke, you can't do that." Sylphie tried to stop him, but he's smearing it more, but it was too late. The page torn by the force of his hand. A Cthulhu snail came charging from behind the pack at breakneck speed. The Luke juice. Everything was ruined by the Luke juice. Literally, Luke juice. So Luke juice cured Rudius, and now Luke juice ruins Rudius. It's poetic in a way. It's poetic in a way. Ants opened their jaws, and slimes shrunk inwards on themselves. They were so enraged they had lost their senses. Edis reflectively jumped in front of them. "Sorry, we really didn't mean to do it." Rudius' pleas fell on deaf ears. The slimes lunged at them, and Edis and Ghislaine lunged forward to cut him down. In a single stroke, they sliced 6 slime cores in half, leaving goopy puddles behind. Edis glanced back and bellowed Rudius' name. He wanted to thank the Demon King for accommodating them, and wanted to explain what happened. Alas, the creatures had gone berserk in fury. They wouldn't listen to reason. "Let's make a run for it." Grabbing their luggage, everyone swiftly followed his lead. Luke was the only one lagging behind, still gobsmacked by his actions that triggered everything. Luke grabbed what was left and drew his sword to protect Ariel. Reese called for Sylphie, who took the lead, interpreting his instructions from just her name. They were on the same wavelength. Or possibly it was coincidence. This is kind of interesting because they do kind of point this out every now and then in this little segment, so I don't want to forget to get into it. It is interesting that they're kind of pointing out, or at least Rudius in his mind is pointing out this possibility that Sylphie is like matching him. Like he's not even having to explain, and she's doing exactly what she needs him to do. I have to admit, there's nothing here that has indicated this to be the case, because now he does point out later on, like, man, this is the first time that we've ever been in battle together. How does she know exactly what I want her to do? It's like we're just in sync. For one, it shouldn't be the first time that they've fought together, because Rudius went with Sylphie and Luke and Roxy and Sarah and all them to do something for Ariel. And you assume like then they would have done some battles together, but they did kind of imply during that time that it was Roxy that was doing everything. And so he was like acting like, man, I did so much stuff. No, I really didn't. It was all Roxy. But he still doesn't explain how are they on the same wavelength. Typically with battle, you become synced because you're experienced together. And it's not so much the case if you fight separately that your tactics will ever come in line, because you both individually handle things differently. And so it actually contributes more to the idea that once you fight side by side, you're not very in sync, because you both feel that things can be handled differently because of your own experiences and your own potentials and your own abilities. But yes, I acknowledge that's just me trying to find logic in it, and it could just be simply the idea of showing how much Sylphie is so perfect for him, or maybe later on they'll actually explain it logically. We'll have to wait and see. Ghislaine, you back up Sylphie. Luke, you stick with the princess and keep her safe. Edison and I will provide cover. Provide cover? Provide cover from where? From the rear. Reese turned his staff at the encroaching slimes as he apologized inwardly to Lord Betoff. Luke had no ill intentions. Well, admittedly, he was probably one of the man god's apostles. It was possible that he was operating under the man god's orders. You will cry on the book, or you'll regret it. No, that was crazy. Regardless, he was apologetic as he casted Frost Nova. Monsters before him were struck, but didn't stop completely. Apparently, they resisted the full effects, but it slowed them down well enough. Ghislaine sliced through the enemies, blocking their paths like they were butter. She used the momentum to continue charging forward before a Cthulhu snail stopped her advances. Her attacks glanced off the shell with a clang before she dodged its counterattack. Sylphie fired off an ice lance that impaled it from below, where it was unprotected. Charging onward, an ant that avoided the Frost Nova skidded across the ceiling and came crashing down on Ariel and Luke. Edis immediately intervened, severing the creature's head from its body before creating an impact crater on the floor. A little bit too much power. Leaving nothing to chance, Ruiz fired off a stone cannon at it, assuming an insect creature might still be able to move without its head. It was an ironclad rule to finish off any enemy, but felt guilty slaughtering the Demon King's familiars. Now, things are getting interesting. Edis is like, finally we get to kill things, thank you! Interesting? It's giving me a stomachache, Reese grumbled as he hurried after Ariel and the others. Damn it, just how many of these creatures are there? The horde pursuing them was unrelenting. The slimes were quicker than it initially appeared. Ants were on them in a second, and able to chomp through bedrock. Worst of all were the snails. With their defenses, they warded off Edis and Ghislaine. Thankfully, the place was a collection of halls, so all they had to do was protect their front and back. Slowly, they inched forward until Ghislaine's sharp voice cut through the air. There, ahead! Looking over, a swarm of slimes clumped together to morph instantly into an enormous slime that blocked their path. There was a side of me that kind of wondered if this big slime was going to be the Demon King. It's like it just made itself again. But no, there is one thing I have to grumble about here is it feels like there's an inconsistency in this chapter with potential and ability. Why is Edis, or even Ghislaine, having trouble cutting through these monsters? Yes, they're supposed to be high defense, but Edis cut off the arm of Orsted, the dragon god. How can she cut off the hand of a dragon god and not through the shell of a snail? Unless it's just strictly that she's not using Sword of Light, which, yes, it technically it doesn't have her saying that or implying that she's doing that, but you'd assume that they can cut through this stuff. A Sword King should be able to cut through a lot of things, and a shell I can see being one of them. It just feels inconsistent there. But I guess it makes it more exciting, I guess. You gotta be kidding me. Tornado Impact. Sylphie launched her magic, and Ghislaine brought down her sword upon it, but the King Slime recovered almost instantaneously. Rudy, I can't handle this thing, said Sylphie. I'll take it from here. Ruiz took the front, while Sylphie took the back, with Edis in a seamless transition. He gave no explicit instruction, but she just moved on her own. Come to think of it, this was the first time they ever fought in battle together. Again, shouldn't have, but again, Roxy could have handled all the fighting that one time. Plus, technically, when they went out to get that flower, when they were trying to entrap Rudius in order to do the whole undressing thing, but I don't know if they ever mentioned they ever fought anything out there. She had more guts than he thought. Rudius did nothing. She was picking up on silent cues and reacting. Her expression betrayed the panic that she was feeling, but in that moment, her lips eased and ears twitched. Perhaps the same thoughts crossed her mind, and with them, a twinge of happiness and embarrassment. Stepping out of this thought, he wondered if the Demon King came into existence this way. No, this thing had a huge number of cores inside of it, not a single entity. Yeah, I don't know if he actually mentioned that, but yeah, technically with the Demon King, it's just this one massive, massive thing with one core. And yes, technically when these things do kind of typically merge, usually with a lot of series that I've seen, the core also merges. But I guess with this particular case in this fantasy world, they stay their own entities. Ghislaine, I'm going to launch a powerful blast and break it into pieces. I want you to take down as many smaller slimes as you can. Got it. She wasn't spacing out, but he gave her detailed instructions to prevent her from charging with his magic. You gotta make sure it's perfectly clear she's gonna just charge in there. Concentrating into his right hand, he needed a spell that could blast the hole through it. Sylphie's Tornado Impact was an advanced spell that made wind rotate rapidly like a drill. It made a hole, but it wasn't enough to break it into pieces. He needs something that would cause destruction in a wide area, something with more power behind it than Sylphie could muster. Improved Sonic Boom. He unleashed a shapeless shockwave. Similar to intermediate spell Sonic Boom, he added a punch that was far exceeded the base spell power. An invisible explosion echoed through the halls, blasting through the slimes at incredible speed. After it shattered to pieces, Ghislaine let out a fierce roar and charged forward, slicing through dozens of cores in a blink of an eye. Ruiz was shocked to see another enemy behind the wall of goop. 5 slid through the snails. They managed to slip past Ghislaine as she slammed her sword into one, finding a weak point. Ruiz fired a stone cannon at 2 others, piercing their shells. And see right here again, they can't chop through it, but stone cannon can? Again, it just doesn't make any sense theoretically. The 4th snail charged onward, and Ghislaine moved in to block it from Rudius. Suddenly, his eye of foresight noticed the 5th one was in the shadow of the 4th one and came unnoticed. It was too late to counterattack. He had to dodge the tentacle. Jerking his upper body back to avoid the tentacle, the snail still managed to ram into him. It sent him backwards, slamming the bookshelf and knocking the air from his lungs. They had broken their line, and the snail was bearing down on Ariel. With a small sword in hand, the princess met it head on. Go girl! Go girl! This is the last thing I expected from Ariel. Girl stepping up. She got it. She got this new renewed energy in her. She was panicked, but not trembling in fear. She was determined. She must have faced many surprise attack like this countless times before. There was no way she could handle it. Rudius launched a stone cannon, feeling it would reach in time. However, at that moment, at the edge of his vision, was a slime that snuck past Ghislaine as she fought with the snails. His stone cannon hit its mark, but the slimes rushed Ariel. Luke had prepared to fight the snail, but now shifted to 10 slimes coming towards them. 2 went after Rudius, 3 went to Ghislaine's flank. While Rudius dealt with his calmly, he kept an eye on Luke, who struck one down. However, the other 4 simultaneously launched at his feet and stomach. He fell to one knee, and the slime covered his sword. Finally, the last slime slammed into his unprotected head. Blood gushed from his forehead and sprayed from his nose. Pulling out a short sword, he stabbed the slime around his main weapon. He followed up by taking down 2 others that lunged at Ariel. I won't let you lay a finger on Princess Ariel. as a final Slyme launched an attack at the back of Luke's head with a force of a cannonball. Ariel drove her sword straight through its core. I honestly, when I was reading this, I thought Luke was dead. I was like, is this it for Luke? Are we just going to knock him out right here? It kind of was giving this feeling like it was talking about how, like, yeah, it hit him in the head, blood's gushing out. Like, these things, like Rudy says, they hit with the force of a cannonball. And now one was going straight after the back of his head. He even says, if it hit, he would have died. And here's Ariel comes in. Sink. Good girl. Ariel, damn. We're getting to see it. Well, again, we never really indicate that Ariel is like they call her a wallflower. A wallflower. But no, skilled. Very skilled. She must have been taking lessons here recently. Princess Ariel, gasped Luke. Luke, in times like this, I have no intention of remaining a simple wallflower. She grinned. The way was clear, and Ghislaine casted a grim look at Rudius. Onward. Peeling himself off the floor, Rudius bathed the party in healing magic as he rejoined Ghislaine at the front. Here's another inconsistency. Just, unless he, like, walks by and I guess touches each one of them and heals them, but, like, just throwing up a healing spell, like, healing requires contact, so it's not like you just bathe people. I'm being nitpicky, I know. Rudius felt guilty for ruining a touching scene, but they had to get moving. They moved towards the exit, as many monsters tried tactics to stop them. Slimes formed walls, snails came in droves, ants used the ceiling. When enemies got by, Luke fiercely protected the princess with his life. Ariel did her own part with her magic and sword. Thanks to their efforts, they reached the teleportation circle, mostly unscathed. If Ariel were a mere wallflower, or Luke betrayed them as Mangod's apostle, their formation would have crumbled. Even so, this was still a failure. He hoped to return there if they needed to have some more research done, but now that seemed impossible. They killed a lot of the Demon King's minions, and damaged many books. Who would have thought someone crying on a book would piss them off so much? The only note of hope is that they moved more like puppets, rather than sentient beings. But even if they were mindless machines, they still destroyed them. It would be foolish to use their lack of sentience to weasel forgiveness out of the Demon King. Even an apology letter probably wouldn't work. At least, there was a few upsides. Whether or not Luke was an apostle of the man god, he proved that he would protect Ariel with his life. Ariel also found her answer for Pedagus's question. They cleared their objective, and that was good enough for now. And that is an incredibly long chapter 7. Holy crap, dude. Yeah, it was kind of something that kind of stood out to me was what Ghislaine says, or what happens with Ghislaine at the end of there, that she looked at Rudius with a grim expression. This was a massive failure on all accounts. I mean, yes, technically they did everything they could to not mess up in there, and it was noted at the very beginning, do not mess with the books. That's very, very important. Do not mess with the books. And yes, just somebody crying on the page, which, I mean, how could you expect that? Somebody being emotional about what they're reading and it just drips on there and it just happens. Nobody's expecting it. That was a massive failure. But I think more in their formation and how they handled the situation. I mean, there was so much notes about how these things weren't strong or they didn't seem very strong. But I think it was, like I mentioned earlier, it's power in numbers. There's just so many of them bearing down on them. Even if a slime is weak, even if one of these snails is weak, it's because there's so many of them bearing down on them that they're becoming overwhelmed. But more so in the idea that I think this is a massive, like, slap in the face for people like Ghislaine and Edis, not being able to take on all of them. And Ghislaine especially, in the idea that she was not protecting that line. We got no indication that really anything came in from the back. So Sylphie and Edis were handling things back there, which was obviously because, you know, Sylphie is able to take care of the snails, and if not anything else, Edis is able to handle the other two, the slimes and the ants. Ghislaine, all of the noted points of things getting past the line was Ghislaine and Rudius. Specifically, what is sort of pointing out is Ghislaine herself. And I think the reason why she looked at Rudius with a grim expression is that she was failing at keeping the line held. Now again, it's not just her. Rudius is involved as well. The two of them should have together been able to hold that line, but they weren't. So it could be something else that Ghislaine is responding to right there, but I'm wondering if it's in the idea that she feels that she did not hold the line, that she failed this job, which is kind of something that gives to Ghislaine's character and the idea that, yes, she was technically, her job when she was with Edis and Saros and Philip and all them, her job was to protect Edis, but it was mostly in the idea that she was training Edis to be an adventurer. It's not as if Ghislaine has like this massive experience in being a guard, and other than the idea that she was trying to protect Edis as much as she could. So it is kind of, I don't hold that against Ghislaine because, again, she's not used to having to protect somebody like that. Eddis was pretty competent herself as well. I mean, Ariel's competent as well in fighting, obviously. We see that she was doing plenty, much more than I thought she would. But I think this is, we'll see. But I'm wondering if we're going to get a moment where Ghislaine's going to be like, I can't work for Ariel because I failed. She's not going to want me. She's going to feel like she's probably a failure. And it's not going to work out that she's going to be able to work with Ariel to find the one that she needs to kill. I'm kind of wondering if Ghislaine's going to be talking about just leaving. Like, oh, well, I failed. This was supposed to be my chance to be working with her. I guess I'll leave. And then maybe it's going to be one of those moments of like, look, it's fine. You did plenty. Don't worry about it. Ghislaine's always been an interesting example of somebody with so much strength, yet so many flaws in combat. Again, pointing out the fact, they're always pointing out how many things that she fails at. From her family, Doldia Village, people saying that she's feral and couldn't be controlled and constantly lashing out at people. And then having the whole situation with all the party members talk about how she's tripping all these traps and all this stuff. She's always pointed out as being dumb and messing up everything. And when in fact she, by all accounts, seems like she's trying. There is a side of it that kind of see that, yes, she doesn't think about things like most people do. She's very flawed in logic thinking department. Again, only just recently learning about math and all that kind of stuff from Rudius. So it's kind of a tragic thing. But again, it was a failure overall in that situation, and I think it was a massive wake-up call. I'm glad that Eddis finally gets her chance to do something in there. Like I said before, I almost felt like this was like a missed opportunity to have Eddis be able to fulfill this dream that she's had her entire life. And again, when they were on the Demon Continent, she wanted to go to one so badly with Rudius, and yet it was this long, boring time to finally have a moment to do something over here. But again, I'm kind of curious as to, again, I know it's explained the idea that these things are super strong, but it's odd to have Ghislaine and Eddis not able to cut through a shell that a stone cannon can go through. But again, it goes into that whole thing about tactics that this stuff kind of creates. It's just like when they were in the teleportation labyrinth. This is the cool stuff where it gets into them essentially having to plan out the scenario. The thing that Geese gave them was this idea of being able to figure out strategy for what's on each floor, what works and what doesn't work. Again, Paul technically getting that sword that can cut through things the more defensive they are. It was cool either way. But yeah, fantastic chapter. And like I said, extremely long. I was actually warned about this when I was coming into it. I was told by the mods, this is 7 is a long one. Apparently, I think there's another chapter that's supposed to be really long in this volume, but really great stuff. I don't know if I'll be able to finish the last chapters with the next Mushoku Monday, but we'll see where it goes. I think it's got 8 and 9 an extra chapter, I think is the last ones, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm very curious to see what Ariel says to Petagoose. I cannot. It doesn't give me enough insight into what she actually read in there. It gives what Rudius, for some reason, knew that it was saying about Luke and Ariel, that he had all expectations for Ariel and that he seen potential in Luke, but not necessarily what Derek seen in Ariel. That's the question mark, other than the potential. So I'll be curious to see what Ariel says to Petagoose. My guess is, again, is in the idea of the people. My expectation has always been that it's of the people. The idea of a king that doesn't want to be king. Basically, the people being the king. The idea that somebody is of the people, lived amongst them. Again, he was constantly going out there and messing around. And he hated the royal family. He hated his family because nobody seen any potential in him. Nobody paid him attention. And so this was his life, was out here messing around with the people. And maybe when it came to this whole situation where everybody's dying, I'm the only one left, he chose to protect his people. He did it in order to protect his people. But again, there is a little bit of a side of me that almost wonders if it is because he has the ability, like Ariel, to enchant people with his words. Maybe Ariel reads somewhere in there that, I don't know, what if Derek Redbat said she has the power? She is actually a blessed child that's able to control people. And if she can learn how to actually use it, and not just passively it's working and she doesn't realize it, she'll be able to enchant Petagoose. But it's odd because Orsid said that Derek was the one that possibly had the words that she needed. But again, it could have been that maybe it was to tell her that she can enchant Petagoose. But we'll see. I'll be interested to see how that kind of plays out. But anyhow, that was again a long Mushoku Monday. Hope you guys enjoyed it as usual. If you did, make sure to hit that like button before you leave. I definitely appreciate you guys for dropping by for the premiere. Again, hey chat, hope you guys are doing well, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, rest of your Monday. As per usual, greatly appreciate you guys' support and all your kind words. All that stuff fuels me to keep going. It's been a blast so far, and I greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel monetarily, memberships, gifted memberships, Patreon supporters. We've been getting a lot of Patreon supporters that are specifically for Mushoku Mondays. I never know what people are actually signing up for Patreon for, so I'm like, hey, thank you for your support or this or that. And I don't know if it's for the podcast. I don't know if it's for the YouTube in general. And then every now and then somebody just replies and says, I'm just doing it for Mushoku Mondays. I like your Mushoku Mondays. I'm like, well, thank you. I appreciate it. It means so much to me. Like I said, it's you guys that are making this ongoing, and I've been so happy with the support and the success we've been having, and cannot wait for the next Mushoku Mondays just as much as you guys. So that all said, until the next Mushoku Monday, y'all take care. As the monsters tried many tactics to stop them, he was guilty for the wave floor with their defenses. Derek Redbat's library. Reese expected to be covered in slime gook, since it doesn't. But it's a core part of adventuring. I thought a labyrinth would be a little bit. The slimes would then collect the resulting luck.